My name is Audrey Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text that felt like a formal eviction from the family. It read, "Don't come to our anniversary party. Only high society guests are invited. We don't want to explain your situation." I thought I was numb to being the invisible daughter. For 10 years, I was the one cropped out of Christmas cards because I worked with old buildings instead of hedge funds. I was a ghost in my own lineage. So, I stayed in my apartment that night, just like they wanted. But then, my phone erupted. It was my sister, Ashley, the golden child who only calls when she needs a mirror. Her voice was trembling. "Audrey, why did you hide this from us? Mom and Dad just saw the news." Before I tell you how their elite party turned into their biggest public scandal, I want to connect with you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who is standing with me. I grew up in the Miller household just outside of Boston, a place where appearances weren't just important, they were the local currency. My parents, Robert and Eleanor, lived for the country club whispers and the prestige of the Miller name. To them, success was measured in zip codes and the title on your business card. Then there was my older sister, Ashley. She was the family's crown jewel. She did everything right, married Justin Smith, a high-flying executive at Goldman Sachs, and moved into a six-bedroom colonial in Wellesley. My parents spoke about her as if she'd personally discovered fire. And then there was me, Audrey. I chose architecture, but not the kind that builds glass skyscrapers for billionaires. I chose historic preservation. I'm the woman who crawls through century-old attics, fighting to save the soul of buildings that developers want to turn into parking lots. To my mother, I wasn't a professional. I was the one who does something with construction, I think. My father was even more cutting. One Thanksgiving, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "When you have a real career, Audrey, we'll talk about putting you back on the family Christmas card." He meant it literally. I hadn't appeared in a family photo in 10 years. I found out later that my mother had actually cropped me out of the digital version she posted on Facebook. Her excuse? "The composition looked better without the clutter, honey." I was the clutter. For a decade, I stood at the edge of the frame, wearing secondhand dresses while Ashley glowed in designer silk. No one ever looked at me, and eventually I stopped looking for them too. But what they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't submission. It was focus. While they were busy polishing their social status, I was building a reputation that didn't need a Miller family seal of approval. 3 years ago, I got the call that would define my life. The Whitmore estate, a 150-year-old landmark mansion, was slated for demolition. The Historical Society had given up. Everyone assumed the wrecking ball was coming, but the National Trust wasn't ready to let go. They needed someone who understood that old buildings aren't just wood and stone, they are stories. They called me. I spent 18 months living and breathing that restoration. I hand-selected every replacement timber. I tracked down artisans who still knew the secrets of Victorian plasterwork. I spent 3 grueling months on the front entrance alone. 2 massive panels of quarter-sawn oak that had been rotting for decades. I sanded them until the grains sang, until they looked like they had been waiting a century just to be seen again. My parents knew nothing. I worked under my firm's name, not my own. I had stopped trying to impress people who had already decided I was a failure. But life has a wicked sense of irony. Out of every venue in the state of Massachusetts, my parents, driven by their desperate need for high society optics, chose the Whitmore estate for their 35th anniversary party. The building I saved, the doors I restored, the legacy I protected. The night I received that text message telling me I wasn't elite enough to attend, I sat in my small Cambridge apartment. The text sat on my screen, glowing like a neon sign of their rejection. "We don't want to explain your situation." My situation. They had spent years crafting a mythology of a troubled daughter to explain why I wasn't at their galas. My mother had told her book club I was struggling with my health. They turned my hard work and independence into a family tragedy to save their own pride. But that same afternoon, a different envelope had arrived. It was heavy cream stock with the American Institute of Architects seal embossed in gold. I opened it with shaking hands. I had been nominated for the AIA Gold Medal for my work on Whitmore. It's the highest honor in the profession, the same award given to legends like Frank Lloyd Wright. I sat there with two pieces of paper. One told me I wasn't worthy of a seat at a dinner table. The other told me I was one of the most important architects of my generation. I realized then that the truth was about to collide with their lies, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to hide. My name is Audrey Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text that felt like a formal eviction from the family. It read, "Don't come to our anniversary party. Only high society guests are invited. We don't want to explain your situation." I thought I was numb to being the invisible daughter. For 10 years, I was the one cropped out of Christmas cards because I worked with old buildings instead of hedge funds. I was a ghost in my own lineage. So I stayed in my apartment that night just like they wanted. But then my phone erupted. It was my sister, Ashley, the golden child who only calls when she needs a mirror. Her voice was trembling. "Audrey, why did you hide this from us? Mom and Dad just saw the news." Before I tell you how their elite party turned into their biggest public scandal, I want to connect with you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who is standing with me. The morning of the anniversary, my Instagram feed felt like a battlefield. Ashley was posting every 10 minutes, a video of her in a black town car, champagne flute in hand, getting her hair touched up at a salon that probably charged more than my monthly utilities. The caption, "Getting ready for the big night at the most exclusive venue in Boston. So proud of Mom and Dad." Then came the shot of the venue. She filmed the front facade of Whitmore Estate, decorated with cascades of white orchids and twinkling fairy lights. My heart skipped a beat when the camera panned over the entrance. There they were, the oak doors. My doors. The ones I'd spent 3 months hand sanding until my knuckles bled. Ashley didn't even glance at the craftsmanship. She just used them as a background for her designer handbag. I didn't witness the start of the party directly, but I heard about it later from Aunt Sarah and Catherine Ross. The guest list was a who's who of New England power. 150 people arrived in a procession of German luxury sedans. The women wore gowns that cost more than my first car, and the men moved with the quiet confidence of old money. My mother, Eleanor, stood at the entrance in a burgundy Valentino gown, diamonds dripping from her ears. She was in her element, greeting guests like she was the queen of the North Shore. My father, Robert, worked the room, leaning into conversations with the energy of a man closing a multi-million-dollar deal. "The venue is spectacular, Eleanor," one guest remarked while standing in the grand foyer. "Who handled the restoration? The attention to detail is museum grade." My mother waved a dismissive, manicured hand. "Oh, some firm or another. Our event coordinator handled the technicalities. I just knew this was the place the moment I saw it. It's so us, don't you think?" She was standing in the middle of my life's work, claiming the vibe as her own, while I sat in my 800-square-foot apartment 45 minutes away. But here's the thing about lies. They require constant maintenance. And that night, the maintenance crew was off duty. At 7:00 p.m., Catherine Ross arrived. Catherine doesn't demand attention. She simply commands it. She walked in wearing simple pearls and a navy dress, the kind of understated elegance that makes everyone else look like they're trying too hard. My mother spotted her instantly. To Eleanor, Catherine was the ultimate prize, the woman who could grant her a seat on the National Trust's board. "Mrs. Ross, what an absolute honor!" Eleanor gushed, crossing the foyer. "I've heard so much about your preservation work." Catherine accepted the greeting with polite neutrality. "I have a deep personal connection to this estate, Eleanor. It's lovely to see it being used." Eleanor's eyes lit up, sensing a networking opening. "Oh, how wonderful! Did you attend events here before the renovation?" Catherine glanced around at the crown molding and the original floors I'd fought to save. "Actually, I was quite involved in the restoration project. I worked very closely with the lead architect. Speaking of which, I was hoping to see Audrey here tonight. Is she running late?" The mask slipped. My mother's smile froze for exactly 1 second. Audrey? Oh, she couldn't make it. She's not well, I'm afraid. You know how it is with sensitive children. We're doing our best for her. Catherine's eyes narrowed. That's strange. I spoke with her yesterday. She sounded perfectly fine. In fact, she sounded inspired. The first crack had appeared in the Miller family mythology. And then at 7:30 p.m., the bomb dropped. The American Institute of Architects published the official announcement online. Within minutes, Architectural Digest shared their feature article. Audrey Miller, the woman reshaping America's heritage. The headline flashed across the phones of every guest in that room. It was a 12-page spread featuring photographs of the very room they were standing in. It started with a local journalist who'd been invited. Her phone buzzed. She did a double take. "Did you see this?" she whispered to the person next to her. "The architect who saved this building just won the AIA Gold Medal nomination. Her name is Audrey Miller." The name began to circulate like a wildfire. Miller? Isn't that the host's name? Guests pulled out their phones, loading the article. There was a photo of me standing in front of the Whitmore entrance, smiling with a confidence my parents had tried to crush for decades. A woman in emeralds approached my mother, showing her the screen. "Eleanor, is this your daughter? It says here she grew up in Wellesley. It says she's the one who restored this entire estate." My mother laughed, a high-pitched, brittle sound. "Oh, that must be a different Miller. Our Audrey, well, she works in construction. Hammer and nails, you know. Not this." But then, someone read the closing quote of the article aloud. "In my family, I never felt like my voice was heard, so I let the building speak instead." The room went deathly silent. My mother's hand began to tremble, her champagne glass rattling against her rings. The clutter they had tried to crop out of their lives had just become the most famous person in the room. My name is Audrey Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text that felt like a formal eviction from the family. It read, "Don't come to our anniversary party. Only high society guests are invited. We don't want to explain your situation." I thought I was numb to being the invisible daughter. For 10 years, I was the one cropped out of Christmas cards because I worked with old buildings instead of hedge funds. I was a ghost in my own lineage. So I stayed in my apartment that night, just like they wanted. But then, my phone erupted. It was my sister Ashley, the golden child who only calls when she needs a mirror. Her voice was trembling. "Audrey, why did you hide this from us? Mom and Dad just saw the news." Before I tell you how their elite party turned into their biggest public scandal, I want to connect with you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who is standing with me. I stood in my kitchen, the silence of my apartment humming in my ears. The Architectural Digest feature had been live for 20 minutes. My phone was a glowing brick of notifications, congratulations from mentors, interview requests, and texts from colleagues. But the one I was waiting for finally arrived. It was Ashley. "Why did you hide this from us?" she hissed the moment I picked up. I could hear the party music in the background, the clinking of crystal, the forced laughter. "Mom and Dad are humiliated. People are showing them the article, Audrey. Judge Thompson's wife just asked why you aren't here. You did this on purpose, didn't you? To upstage them?" "I didn't choose the announcement date, Ashley," I said, my voice eerily calm, "and I didn't choose to be uninvited. You told me not to come, remember? You said I'd be uncomfortable around those people." "Because you're a mess," she shouted, "and now everyone thinks we're the ones who are lying. You need to stay away. Don't you dare show your face here." She hung up. I looked at the dark screen. For a second, that old familiar guilt tried to creep in, the urge to apologize for existing. But then I looked at my wrist, the Cartier watch I'd bought myself. I looked at the AIA letter. I realized that for 10 years I had been a guest in my own life, waiting for their permission to occupy space. Not anymore. I put on a midnight blue wrap dress, simple, elegant, the kind of dress that doesn't scream for attention because it knows it's already won. I drove the 45 minutes to Whitmore Estate in a daze of clarity. As I pulled up the long, winding drive, the mansion looked like a dream come to life. The limestone was glowing under the spotlights, my limestone. I parked at the far end of the lot and walked toward the entrance. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my feet were steady. I reached the oak doors. I ran my hand over the grain, feeling the smoothness of the oil finish I'd applied myself. I pushed them open and stepped into the light. The grand foyer was packed, a sea of black ties and silk gowns. But as I walked in, the conversation didn't just dip, it died. 150 people turned their heads. I saw the recognition flash in their eyes. I wasn't the troubled daughter anymore. I was the face from the article. I saw my mother, Eleanor, standing by the marble fireplace. Her face went from blotchy red to a deathly, chalky white. My father, Robert, stood beside her, his boardroom mask finally cracking. I walked straight toward them. Every step felt like I was reclaiming a piece of my soul. "Audrey," my father said, his voice dropping to that low, controlling register. "This is hardly the time or place for family drama. You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Dad," I said, loud enough for the guests nearby to hear. "I'm embarrassing you. There's a difference." My mother stepped forward, her smile looking like it was held together by sheer willpower. "Audrey, sweetie, we were just telling everyone how proud we are. It was all a big misunderstanding. We thought you were too busy with your construction projects. You told people I was mentally unstable, Mom," I said. The silence in the room was absolute. "You told Aunt Sarah I couldn't function. You cropped me out of the photos for a decade because I didn't fit the brand. But you're standing in my brand right now. You're hosting a party in my masterpiece." Catherine Ross stepped out from the crowd. She didn't say a word to my parents. She walked right up to me and handed me a heavy cream envelope. "Since you're finally here, Audrey," Catherine announced, her voice carrying with effortless authority, "I'd like to share the news. The National Trust has approved a $500,000 grant for the governor's mansion restoration, and we've selected Audrey Miller to lead the project." The room erupted. Actual, genuine applause. Not the polite golf clap of the elite, but the sound of people recognizing a winner. I looked at my sister, Ashley. She was standing by the bar, her perfect life melting away as her husband, Justin, looked at her with an expression of pure realization. He was finally seeing the lies she had built their marriage on. I looked at my parents, two people who had spent their lives worshiping the elite, only to realize they were the only ones in the room who didn't belong. "I'm not here for an apology," I told them, as the guests began to crowd around me with business cards and congratulations. "I'm here because I don't need your invitation to stand in a room I built." I turned my back on them and walked toward the people who actually saw me. I spent 10 years trying to be part of their picture. I finally realized I was the one who owned the gallery. "My name is Audrey Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text that felt like a formal eviction from the family. It read, 'Don't come to our anniversary party. Only high society guests are invited. We don't want to explain your situation.' I thought I was numb to being the invisible daughter. For 10 years, I was the one cropped out of Christmas cards because I worked with old buildings instead of hedge funds. I was a ghost in my own lineage. So, I stayed in my apartment that night, just like they wanted. But then, my phone erupted. It was my sister, Ashley, the golden child who only calls when she needs a mirror. Her voice was trembling. "Audrey, why did you hide this from us? Mom and Dad just saw the news." Before I tell you how their elite party turned into their biggest public scandal, I want to connect with you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who is standing with me. The aftermath of that night didn't feel like a sudden explosion. It felt like the slow, steady hum of a machine finally clicking into place. After I walked out of the Whitmore estate, leaving the whispers and the champagne bubbles behind, I didn't feel the rush of adrenaline I expected. Instead, I felt a profound, quiet peace. For the first time in 32 years, the air in my lungs felt like it belonged to me. The fallout for the Miller family, however, was far more turbulent. In the weeks that followed, the house of cards my mother had built began to fold. Aunt Sarah became my unexpected bridge to that world. She called me a week later, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and awe. "Audrey, I am so sorry," she whispered. "We all believed your mother because we couldn't imagine a parent would invent such stories about their own child. The club is talking, honey. Not about your struggles, but about Eleanor's cruelty." My mother's social standing, the thing she valued above her own daughter, was evaporating. The women in her book club, the ones who had sent sympathy cards for her troubled daughter, now looked at her with a mix of pity and judgment. You see, in the circles my parents craved, being elite is about more than money. It's about class. And there is nothing less classy than being caught in a desperate, envious lie against your own blood. But the most significant fracture happened in Ashley's perfect world. Justin, her husband, was a man of numbers and cold facts. At the party, he had watched the woman he married dissolve into a mess of defensive excuses. He began to look back at the last 5 years of their marriage. Every story she'd told him about my failures, every time she'd blocked me from attending their events. And he realized he'd been married to a ghostwriter of fiction. According to Aunt Sarah, Justin moved out 3 weeks after the party. He told Ashley he couldn't build a future on a foundation of sand. My sister, who had spent her life being the golden child, was suddenly alone in a 6-bedroom colonial, realizing that without a scapegoat to look down on, she had no idea who she actually was. She sent me a text. Just 4 words. "You ruined my life." I didn't reply. I didn't ruin her life. I just stopped being the dark background that made her look bright. 3 months later, a text arrived from my father. It was the first time Robert Miller had reached out without an intermediary. It wasn't an apology. Men like him rarely know how to form those words. But it was a crack in the ice. "Audrey, I've been reading about the governor's mansion project. I'd like to see it when it's finished, if you're okay with that." I sat with that message for a long time. I thought about the 10 years of being cropped out of photos. I thought about the Thanksgiving, where he told me I didn't have a real career. I realized that I didn't hate him, but I didn't need him either. My worth wasn't a dividend he could suddenly decide to collect now that the stock was high. I wrote back, "The project is for the public, Dad. You're welcome to buy a tour ticket when it opens. I'll let you know the dates." It was a boundary, not a bridge, and it felt magnificent. As for my mother, she remains in a state of polished denial. She tells anyone who will listen that the party was a celebration of the family's collective success, and that I've always been prone to dramatics. Some people would rather live in a beautiful ruin of a lie than a solid, honest house. I've stopped trying to renovate her. I'm standing outside the governor's mansion now. It's a crisp, gray Boston morning, and the limestone is cold under my fingertips. This building is a wreck, leaking roofs, cracked foundations, and layers of grime. But as I look at it, I don't see the decay. I see the potential. I see the strength that's been hidden for 2 centuries, just waiting for someone to care enough to bring it back to the light. My name is Audrey Miller. I am a restoration architect. I don't just fix buildings, I reclaim history. And as I put on my hard hat and step inside, I realized the most important restoration I ever performed wasn't on the Whitmore estate. It was on myself. I spent a decade waiting for my family to give me a seat at the table. I finally realized I was the one who designed the room. My name is Audrey Miller. I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my parents sent me a text that felt like a formal eviction from the family. It read, "Don't come to our anniversary party. Only high society guests are invited. We don't want to explain your situation." I thought I was numb to being the invisible daughter. For 10 years, I was the one cropped out of Christmas cards because I worked with old buildings instead of hedge funds. I was a ghost in my own lineage. So I stayed in my apartment that night, just like they wanted. But then my phone erupted. It was my sister, Ashley, the golden child who only calls when she needs a mirror. Her voice was trembling. "Audrey, why did you hide this from us? Mom and Dad just saw the news." Before I tell you how their elite party turned into their biggest public scandal, I want to connect with you. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know who is standing with me. My name is Audrey Miller, and my journey taught me a vital lesson. Your value is defined by the depth of your character, not the height of someone else's expectations. Build your own empire, and the right people will find their way to the gate. If this story moved you, please like, comment still standing, and subscribe to From My Heart for more stories of resilience. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, stay strong. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental.